what you might call it severe empathy-based techniques and seriously provocative techniques like Nick Kemp's introduction of provocative therapy into NLP. Now, I think all of those things have a really good place in helping people to change. Knowing which one to emphasize more is a new kind of skill, I think.
Okay. And do you make that assessment at the beginning? What area? Where they are in that process of change? Do you make that known in the information gathering stage?
To some extent, almost with the first things that the person tells me, they start telling me about that, and they tell me, for example, in the first things that a person says to me, and I say that in the Resolve book, they tell me whether they're good at chunking up or chunking down. They tell me whether they're good at associating into experiences and feeling things, or dissociating from experiences and kind of projecting and blaming other things for what's going on. So that in the same way, they also tell me whether they are good at matching or mismatching, whether they're good at being similar or dissimilar. They tell me whether they are motivated towards or away from, just by the structure of their first couple of sentences. But over kind of checking through, if I was using that Resolve model and checking through that checklist there, then there'll be some things that people find a stumbling block. For example, some people will find it really easy to have a goal, and for some people that's going to take a whole session, and it's going to be a life-changing thing for them to have what I would call a goal, rather than a sort of a restatement of what they don't want in life, or a globalized kind of values concept. So focusing on the part of the change process that the person finds a challenge is really, really valuable. And for new practitioners, that scares them because they think, gee, I've just spent the whole session doing what's supposed to be the first 10 minutes, something like that. But it's not like that. It's that this person needs this to change everything in their life.
And it goes back to that experience thing, I imagine, as well, whereas if you saw one person, you could gauge it within about 5-10 minutes, whereas as a more of a novice person, they'd be able to take maybe about 15 minutes, and the change process can still happen, just it may take a little bit longer.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, it depends where I train people, but certainly in New Zealand, one of the things I find is that new practitioners tend to go along with the person that they're working with, so that their style as a new practitioner tends to fit well for people who like to cooperate with them, and who will kind of almost by placebo effect do whatever they tell them to. And that new kind of technique doesn't go well for people who like to find differences, who are skeptical, who have all sorts of reasons why they can't possibly change things. And so one of the things that the new practitioner often lacks is the daring to be a little outrageous with something like that, in order to, well, as Nick Kemp would say, to provoke change. Absolutely.
And also in your book, you talk about working with the people in Sarajevo and the other places, and most recently with the tsunami in Japan. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the processes you use to help these people, and also what it's taught you by working with these people about the ways that humans deal and process trauma.
Yeah. Well, there are some characteristics of those experiences that are different to everyday NLP work. Huge social disruption like war. I worked in the area around Chechnya as well, and then the processes that happened with the tsunami. I worked in Samoa after the tsunami that hit there a couple of years ago, Christchurch in New Zealand after the earthquake this year, and right now, of course, we've just been running training here for people going up into the devastated areas of North Japan. I'm teaching people things for 3 stages of that process. One is what happens when they're actually in a disaster, which scares the hell out of new practitioners, of course, because if you walk into that situation, then you're going to be experiencing aftershocks yourself. You may see people actually get injured in front of you or something like that. So they need skills for dealing with that effectively. Then they need skills for dealing with the situation where the disaster is an ongoing thing. And it's not a matter of doing a trauma cure. In the traditional NLP trauma cure, you're sort of saying, okay, well, this thing that happened once, like, when was it start, when was it end? It's end, let's make a movie of it. And when a person is still in the middle of it, it's not like that. They're still laying down the memory, and we have some good research about this. The memory process won't allow you to do the same change processes immediately while things are going on. It's kind of like, it's as if you were transferring a file from your computer to a backup disk, and in the process you clicked on it to see if you could edit it, and the computer puts up a little error message that says you can't edit this while you're transferring it into long-term memory. So we teach some techniques which are really techniques for processing something as it's going on, and then some for looking back and restructuring a memory. I could say a little more about that, but that's the overview of what we're teaching. So,
in a way, you're dealing very much in the moment, like when they're actually still experiencing that trauma, and then maybe like when you're dealing with someone that's after the time, and they change to a certain extent the way that you deal with them.
Yeah, that's right. So someone who's looking back on something that happened, 3 years ago, or even that they know is now over, when a war is over, that's a different thing to, like, we have Japanese NLP practitioners who are regularly now going up into the disaster area there. They're going through places where there are still bodies around. They're going through places where people have nowhere to live. They don't have adequate food and so on. So they are, in fact, inside a disaster. And so that what you're going to teach people there is how to ask themselves helpful questions about what's going on, for example. That's one thing I teach quite a bit is that there are two kinds of unhelpful questions that people get stuck on sometimes in that situation. One is to ask themselves, why did this happen, or why did it happen to me? Which it's kind of past oriented, doesn't actually give you any good information about what you're going to do. And then the next kind of question I ask is what if? And I ask, like, what if the house fell down in 10 minutes' time and I was horribly killed? And the answer is, it would be bloody awful. So there's really that doesn't give them anything to do either. And the more successful, or resilient is the word we'd use, the more resilient people, they ask kind of questions like, what's the best I can do right now to make sure that I stay the safest I can? What's the biggest priority right now? Kind of more useful internal questions that actually give them answers that enable them to carry on with life. Okay. So that's not all we're doing. We're teaching them how to kind of quickly anchor themselves back into relaxed states so they can get some sleep at night, things like that. But these are real disaster management strategies.
Is there a difference between going there and supporting a person, and going there and actively working to change the way that they cope with the situation? Is that a transition, or is it?
It's a radical shift in attitude, I would say. And in every culture, people understand that it's possible to go into these places and feel what you'd like to think is compassion, but which is probably kind of pity for these people. And that doesn't help them at all. It disempowers them, and it teaches them that now they're in some way broken, and that now they have got into another category where someone else needs to do everything for them. So it really is a shift to teach people to empower themselves. It's also really important for practitioners in that situation to have a good understanding of this NLP idea that it's not actually what happens out there that produces the damage. It's the way that a brain processes things with perfectly good intentions that creates either a traumatic or a non-traumatic kind of memory of the situation.
Did you notice any difference between the tsunami victims that you saw this year and the people in Sarajevo when you went with them? Because I remember seeing it on the news, and one of the things that I noticed was how they still kept with their principles. That the evacuation centre was all meticulous, and they had built a road in 6 days that had been completely demolished. Have you noticed a difference in how the people are now to how they maybe were in Sarajevo?
Well, one of the things is a big cultural difference that I think Japanese culture, from research, is one of the most resilient cultures in the world. And for better or for worse, the Japanese approach to a situation like this tends to be to assume that in the bigger picture you've just got to keep going. And that works fantastic for the kind of thing you're describing. It's not such a good approach when you've got a nuclear reactor melting down next door. It
doesn't help, no.
Yeah, probably it's sensible to get the hell out of there. But the resilience of the culture here is absolutely inspiring. And the other thing is, I mean, there's a different... It happened a little in both places, but there's a different level of guilt as well. In a war, of course, people know that they have done horrific things as well as experienced horrific things. And whatever their justification, that's not easy to live with. I worked in Sarajevo on both sides of the border between Republika Srpska and Sarajevo, and I certainly talked with people who have been involved in mass murder, and they have enormous guilt. On the other hand, so do people who saved 2 of their children and watched the others washed away in a flood, which is something that we work with all the time in these places like Samar and North Japan. Yeah, it's a little more complex than just the trauma cure, because there's a whole lot of reframing of those things that needs to happen for people to be able to live another day.
Absolutely, and I imagine it's quite fulfilling for you sometimes to see that process of the work that you do, and based on that experience of people that have really gone through these things, what has it taught you about the ability that you don't actually need to go through years of therapy, and you can actually deal with these things much quicker than previously thought?
Yep. Well, let me give you a little example story. I have a lot of these stories that I tell on the training, but when I went to Sarajevo, I think the first time I went there, I asked for a demonstration subject for the standard trauma cure process, and the guy who volunteered, he said, look, this is not a war trauma, it's something that happened when I was 18. When he was 18, he went on his first date, and it was in the old city of Sarajevo, a beautiful place, and he met this woman, young woman, and it was a marvelous romantic thing. She said, I've got something to show you, and she reached into her blouse, and he had no idea what she was going to take out. She took out a little white mouse, and he sort of jumped back in shock. And then he realized, oh shit, now she's going to think that I was frightened of her pet mouse. So then he turned and ran. And of course, as soon as he started running, he realized this is a stupid idea. And so he, embarrassment is an archetypically traumatic response. It's like, it wasn't so bad at first, but if they replay it 1,000 times, it gets a hell of a lot worse.
It gets worse, yeah.
And so fairly quickly he developed a phobia. Now, luckily for the poor guy, he didn't develop a phobia of women or breasts or something, but he developed a phobia of mice. And so then the war came. And of course, as bombs fell on Sarajevo, as shells fell, the sirens would start, and everyone had to run into the next building, whatever it was, house or public building, and they had to go straight down into the cellar to be safe. And he couldn't do it. So he was just standing there out there watching people being blown to pieces of human